Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today in the show, we have Katherine and Shaan Somani. They're clinical research fellows and they co-wrote the KevinMD article, Unsolicited Advice from Unmatched Residency Applicants. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Katherine and Shaan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit. I'm going to ask each of you to share your stories and journeys to where you are today. Katherine, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas. And so for me, from a pretty early age, I knew I wanted to do medicine. And so I went through the traditional route. I went to college at Rice and then went to med school at UT Houston. And so during med school, late into my third year, I decided to pursue otolaryngology as the specialty of choice. And so last year I applied for residency, and then unfortunately things didn't go as planned. And I ended up this March being unmatched. And so after kind of considering my options, I decided to pursue a clinical research fellowship at the University of Kansas in Kansas City with their otolaryngology department. And this is where I've been for the past few months. And so that's kind of a little bit about my background.
And Katherine, are you planning to match again in otolaryngology?
Yes, I am applying again this cycle. And so we're right now in the midst of interviews.
All right. And in general, how difficult is it to get into an otolaryngology residency?
Yeah, so a lot of surgical subspecialties are pretty competitive, and otolaryngology is the same. In the past few years, it has been increasingly competitive. I would say last year, about 600 people applied, and there are only about 450 spots. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shaan. And so the match percent or match rate last year was about 67 to 70%.
And Shaan, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
So I was originally born in Indiana and then raised for part of my life between Indiana and California. I was part of the combined medical program at Northwestern. So I did both undergrad there for 3 years and then 4 years at the medical school in Chicago. I knew pretty early on in medical school that I had an interest in otolaryngology, but similar to Katherine, last year I applied and didn't match. And so I was really fortunate in that my school allowed me to delay graduation without having to pay tuition. And so during this time, I've been working as a clinical research fellow at the University of Kansas, which was the inspiration for the two of us to write this article.
Wonderful. I went through a combined program myself at Boston University. So tell me about your experience going through a combined program versus a traditional.
I absolutely loved it. I think that there's a lot of benefits for it, especially from the student perspective. It allowed, personally, I was able to go through the process with a lot less stress. The GPA requirements, the MCAT requirements were so much less than that of a traditional pre-med student, but there was also a lot of benefits in terms of personal growth. I was able to explore certain passions and be able to pursue certain individual interests that I don't think I necessarily would have if I had had to spend all that time really preparing myself to look incredible on paper simply for the purpose of applying to medical school. And it also gave me a really tight-knit community that many of which I consider my best friends and I still keep in touch with.
All right, so let's talk about the KevinMD article that both of you co-wrote titled Unsolicited Advice from Unmatched Residency Applicants, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Worst. Katherine, for those who didn't get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you and Shaan decided to write it?
So since we both came from a relatively unique experience of not matching, and we spent a lot of the last few months kind of reflecting on our own experiences, going through the process, we thought we had some pointers that we wanted to kind of give medical students who might be doing the same thing this cycle and also in the future. From our experience, and we wanted to really kind of emphasize to the readers, whether they're students or faculty members, the importance of kind of really planning out what you want to do and having conversations early on in the process, really considering your odds and just different other life lessons or pointers that we wanted to really convey. Since you know that it is really stressful on this application process. And unfortunately, there is a chance of not matching since I think last year, the match rate for otolaryngology and a lot of the surgical subspecialties were in the 70%. And then I think a lot of the voices of people who are unmatched are unheard because if you look at the national match rates, it's 97%. And so that's why we thought it was important to really be open about what we went through and to hopefully help people who may or may unfortunately end up going through the same.
Just to quickly tag on to what Katherine had mentioned, I think that the goal of our article really was we wanted to target it towards these applicants towards specialties that are inherently considered very competitive. So, these surgical subspecialties or certain other specialties where the match rate tends to be in 70%. But that being said, there's always a chance of not matching. And I think that it's prudent to have backup plans or to kind of cognitively be aware that this could occur, just so that, if you were to receive that news, then you're in the position where you at least know what are the next steps. And this is something that's really true for any applicant to residency, and that's something we hope to convey.
So Katherine, for those who aren't familiar with applying to an otolaryngology residency, describe what that process entails and how many programs that you apply to.
Sure. Well, I knew it was very competitive, and I think all the candidates who apply to this specialty, you kind of self-select because you know that it is competitive. And so your board scores have to be extremely high. And then also you have to have good clinical grades and also be very well-rounded with both like extracurriculars and research scholarly activities. And so for me, I decided relatively late, but I knew I was a decent applicant, and I still applied to almost all of the programs, which is about 100.
And Katherine, how many programs did you interview at?
I interviewed in like the mid-teens last year, which is about average, I would say. I'm not sure that they don't really kind of release the numbers for interviews normally applicants get, but I was predicted based off of the national match data about 2 years ago to have like a 90-something% chance of matching. And then unfortunately, it did not happen.
And Shaan, I know that it was certainly a very difficult experience for both of you, but take us through that week when you found out the news that you didn't match. What was it like?
Yeah, I truthfully, I look back and I think that was without question probably the most stressful week of my life. It's just, you see the email where it says very clearly from the NRMP that we're sorry you did not match into a residency position, and my heart just sunk. Our medical school had a policy where immediately we were supposed to go to their office and just kind of, it was like a war room where we're brainstorming with our mentors. People are coming in, they're giving their advice, emotional support. I'm having calls with all of my mentors within the field as well as my family. And it was a large period of just feeling as though I was to some degree racing against the clock, trying to hope that I could find some sort of position or plan for the upcoming year. I already came into it with the idea of what I thought my backup plan would be, but I was really surprised that when I was in that moment itself, my entire idea of my backup plan had changed, where once it became a reality, I came to recognize that my original backup plan was to just abandon otolaryngology and to completely pursue another specialty. But the more I reflected on it, the more I felt that I wanted to give it another go, that I'm very motivated and I'm driven towards the specific field. And so I would do whatever it took in order to make that a reality. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have secured this fellowship here at the University of Kansas.
So Shaan, take us like into that war room, as you call it. What are the options in general that are available to those who don't match?
Yeah, so I think that the options available to you differ depending on when you really start having this discussion or thought, which is part of the reason why we wrote this article, because we really hope that by giving this information that some applicants will start having these conversations with their mentors as early as December, January, rather than March when they find out the news. Ultimately, if you only find out in March, your options are really to pursue a research program or a research year, or you could do a transitional or a prelim year, or perhaps another alternative, which is significantly less rare. Some people perhaps spend their year volunteering or do something completely outside of medicine. My personal opinion is that if you're going to be prelimming or going into a prelim spot or a transitional spot, that's completely separate than your original plan or your original residency choice, then it really behooves you to really think about this as early as August and September before you even apply, because you could always have these prelim spots and interview them through the normal process and then just simply put them towards the end of your rank list. But at least then you're in a lot more control and over the situation rather than having to scramble at the last minute.
So Katherine, after you found out the news that you didn't match, walk me through the options that was facing you and why did you choose the option that you eventually did?
Sure. So similar to Shaan, I kind of it was definitely a shock. I knew there was always a possibility that I didn't match, but I was very much hoping for the best. And so I was fortunate enough to have like a really strong mentor. And so we actually had a conversation a few months prior to March about what I would want to do if I didn't match. And so after talking with him and kind of considering my options a few months ahead of finding out my result, I was pretty dedicated on continuing to pursue otolaryngology. I thought about either doing a prelim year, like Shaan said, or doing research. And in my perspective, I wanted to, if there was an open spot, I would go for it for otolaryngology. But if not, I wanted to make my application stronger by doing research. And also, I thought that research would benefit me in the long term as well. I could pick up skills that would help me in my future career, especially if I'm interested in academia. And so those are kind of the reasons that led me to decide on a research fellowship. And so on that Monday, after I got the news, I immediately checked to see if there were any open spots. And then after that, it was a lot of looking around and seeing what options were available for research fellowships. And I was also very fortunate to be offered this position here at Kansas.
Both of you decided to continue to pursue otolaryngology. Now, Katherine, if you were to switch fields, what options were available to you?
If I were to switch fields, I think during that week, if I wanted to switch into another specialty and kind of scramble or soak for another specialty, almost all of them were open. I think the only things were kind of the more competitive things like orthopedics or neurosurgery or plastic surgery. They didn't have any open spots, but all the other subspecialties were available. And so those were things I could have done, but I wasn't really interested, I would say. So that's part of the reason why I decided not to do any of them, since early on in med school, I already kind of went through the thought process of what I wanted to do, and then nothing that was available at the moment, no residency spots really fit my vision of my future career.
So Katherine, when you mentioned all the other residency slots were open other than the orthopedic surgery, so are we talking about things like family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics? What about general surgery?
Yes, I'm not too clear whether or not there are any general surgery spots, but there were preliminary positions in general surgery. And so those are kind of 1-year positions that you would be an intern, but you weren't guaranteed to be able to continue your residency at that program. And so you have to reapply again. And that's something I didn't want to do. So that's definitely an option people frequently choose to do if they don't match into a surgical specialty. But I thought otolaryngology is also relatively unique in that your intern year, half of the time you're with this field, but then the other half you're off service or rotating through other specialties. And so I thought that it would benefit me more to do research rather than scrambling or soaping into a prelim general surgery.
And Shaan, both of you talked about the importance of mentorship during this difficult time.
Mhm.
So speak more to that. How do you find a good mentor, and what other types of support systems did you have during this period?
Yeah, honestly, I want to give a quick shout out to my mentor, Dr. Matsuoka, because he truly, I don't know if I could have handled that single week if not for him. He had my back through the entire process. He was the one who was helping me realize like where I should apply for research programs and what opportunities were available. In terms of how to find a research or a mentor like that, I consider myself really lucky. I think that to some extent, naturally, I sought out many different mentors throughout my time in medical school who were within the field. And I think it really came down to a personality fit. I found that he and I just really were of the same, we're cut from the same cloth. We really had the same sense of humor. And he also clearly really cared about my personal growth. And that's something that it's hard to necessarily find always in a mentor. There are a lot of mentors who are great at giving advice, but there are not many in my experience who are comfortable giving constructive feedback and willing to tell you to your face what you're not good at, because that's how you can improve. And I think that once you're able to find that, it's something that you should really hold on to, because that's someone who cares about you to the extent that they're willing to tell you this. And it's never in a mean way. It's always purely from a place of actual care. In terms of other students, I think that it's about reaching out early on, trying to seek out different people, seeing where there's that personality fit, And it's tough. You might not always find it, but to a certain extent, you just have to make sure that you have those mentors available. And then beyond, I guess to answer your second question, I really relied on, as well on my family as well as on my friends. They were huge support networks. As soon as I found out that I didn't match, I basically broadcasted the news. I didn't want to hide it. I wanted to make it very clear to people what was going on in my life, because that's how I knew that they would be able to check in on me. And throughout that entire week, I had every day several people who were calling and texting just to make sure I was okay.
We're talking to Katherine Yu and Shaan Somani. They are clinical research fellows, and they co-wrote the KevinMD article, Unsolicited Advice from Unmatched Residency Applicants, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Worst. Shaan, now that you've had some time to reflect on this experience, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I think really looking back at last year, the biggest thing I wish I had done, I really tried to prepare for virtual interviews, but it's just different. It's not quite the same as interviewing in person. And I've really made much more of an effort this time around. I think going through the interview process again, I feel that the conversations are a lot more natural, and people, I would say that on both sides were a lot more engaged. But last year, I think I struggled with that. And as much as possible, I would recommend just doing a lot of interview prep, not just with your friends or with your family, but with mentors and really anyone who you could see providing some level of constructive feedback. And a lot of people will be able to pick up on different things. So interview prep was 100% the thing that I wish I had done a lot more of. Not to say that I didn't, but I think I probably could have stood to benefit from just doing 10 times the amount.
And Katherine, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I think I was really fortunate of having a mentor who was there to advocate for me and also go through the whole process and support me and prepare me for interviews. I think my decisions, I think I don't regret anything I really decided to do. I'm really grateful to be doing research. I think I've grown a lot and learned a lot from these past few months. I think if I could change anything, I wish I decided earlier on in my medical school career what I wanted to do, but that's not something that was, I guess, within my control. So I honestly don't think I have really any regrets. I think going through the process this time around, I feel similarly to Shaan, I feel more relaxed and maybe less high strung since we've gone through it once. And so I think maybe in some ways during these interviews can actually really demonstrate who I am better. And that's possibly one way I struggled last year. And so, yeah, I think overall it's been a good experience for me. I think I learned a lot about my own personal kind of resiliency and ability to adapt when things don't go my way, since I think medicine is a very, compared to other like career fields, there's like a very clear like ABCD path that you do. And so I think for the first time in my life where things didn't go as planned, I had to figure out and kind of pivot and change my route. And so I think that was, it's a very valuable kind of personal like learning experience.
So Katherine, you said that you wish you may have decided on otolaryngology earlier in your medical school career. Would you have done more research? What would you have done earlier on?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was fortunate enough to establish like strong connections with faculty members in my home programs department. I think if I kind of decided earlier on, I would have been able to do more research and had more exposure to the field, since both of us were unfortunate that COVID happened during our third year and part of our fourth year. And so I think I may have lost out a lot of time and like being more invested in the specialty. And so I think that's one area. But of course, a lot of medical students don't decide later on. And so I think, and they still turn out fine with whatever they decide on. And so it's just kind of a variety of factors that were outside my control. And I think, yeah, that's pretty much, I guess I'd have to say.
So my final question to each of you would be your one piece of most actionable advice to other unmatched applicants and some take-home messages. So Shaan, why don't we start with you?
I think that the biggest take-home message that Katherine and I would hope to take, or that at the very least we certainly hope to convey through our article, is that not matching is not the end of the world. And it is certainly a stressful experience and it can feel devastating at the time, but it is a challenge. And like any challenge in life, it is an opportunity for growth. And so take that, reflect, and think about how you want to spend the year ahead and make the most of it to the best of your ability, and if that means pivoting to a different career path, sticking with your original goal, no matter what, this is an opportunity for you to put in the work and to shine.
And Katherine, what are some pieces of advice and take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
I definitely agree with Shaan. I think that is something that we both really want to emphasize, that I think for a lot of the medical students who are applying, this may be their first experience with like major failure. And I think just the way that kind of the education system is set up, it is hard on people who don't match. And so I think we wanted to really encourage applicants who go through this that yeah, it's not the end. And there's so many things that are out there that you can continue to do. And you can still pursue medicine if that's what you wanted to do, or you can pivot and do something else. And so I think that's my main piece of advice. And I guess secondary is really, really talk to your mentors. I think honesty both ways is something that's really important. I think that that's the only way that they can give you the advice that with all the information that they have. And also you can really kind of trust them to have all the information to really guide you the right way. And so I think that is the maybe secondary piece of advice I would want to give.
Katherine and Shaan, thank you so much for sharing your stories, time, and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you again.